as we move into our next session, this society is your society, okay? You know, we're always looking for folks to be participants either on our boards, in our executive area, or just as part of helping set up symposiums. So feel free at any point to reach out to Jim and the team here on reaching out. I mean, that's kind of how I started here, working on things. I mean, I see Joe Cassidy up here. Joe's been helping us out for a long time on a lot of different things. So with that, please reach out. Another public service announcement reading yesterday. Just want to send a quick congratulation out to Dawn Scheibel. As of yesterday, she is going to be presented with a great new opportunity in the NASA realm. So she's going to be the interim center director out at Langley. So congratulations to Dawn. So today we're talking a lot about power and radiation and transfer of power. Our next speaker coming up here is Dr. Ramona Gaza. She comes from Leidos as a technical fellow there. Today we'll be hearing more about the long-duration space flight and how human beings might be able to cope with hidden hazards. Our speaker, Dr. Gaza, she joins us from the Space Radiation Analysis Group at NASA Johnson. She's been with that since 2005. She currently serves as the Deputy Radiation Systems Manager for the Orion program and as the Human Health and Performance Science Team lead for MAR payloads on Artemis I. Fun fact about Dr. Gaza. So we were talking a little bit earlier. She heralds from Transylvania. So if anyone wants to know anything about Transylvania and Romania, she is the person to talk about. So I did check her teeth. She's, you know, at this point, she seems to be, she doesn't seem to have any of those characteristics that one might be concerned about. Really sweet person. I think we'll have a lot of fun here. She applied her research focuses on crew protection and risk mitigation for ionizing and non-ionizing radiation sources in space, including use of direct ion storage devices, time-pix detectors, and OSL-TL dosimeters. With that, she has produced or been part of over 150 different papers. She is an expert in her field and someone we can really look forward to hearing what she has to say. Dr. Gaza, please come up, kick me off the stage.
Thank you. Let's see, I'm trying to see, scrolling, maybe this one. Is this the right one? I found it here. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. All right. So I really like this quote because it touches on sustainable programs, innovation, collaboration with commercial and international partners, and all to explore across the solar system. What type of radiation do we protect against? And you heard a lot about ionizing radiation sources. We look for environmental hazards, and then those come from 4 different sources: galactic cosmic rays, trapped particles in the Van Allen belts, and solar particle events. You heard the mention of that as well as secondary radiation generated from all of these natural sources interacting with the vehicle or the spacesuit. Artificial manufactured sources, we have radioactive sources, but of course the nuclear technologies we mentioned as well. When it comes to non-ionizing radiation, the only environmental source we have is sunlight. Besides that, we look at lasers, radio frequency emitters, and other artificial incoherent light sources as well. Today, I'm going to focus on the ionizing radiation component and what do we do to protect our astronauts from the space radiation. This is just a nice visual from NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center of how complex space weather is and all the parts involved. So I'm going to split it just in what's relevant to us when it comes to crew safety. Galactic cosmic rays, we call those the background radiation in space. They are modulated by the sun's 11-year cycle, and you see a graphic of that provided by NOAA as well. I think right there on the left. So you see the prediction is the gray band, and the data points are where we are actually in the solar maximum right now. We'll reach and exceed solar maximum by 2026, and we look at that, and that modulates the GCR as well. They are primarily high-energy, high-Z particles. We had some talks this morning of what makes space radiation. So we are not so interested in gamma and other types of radiation encountered on the ground as much as we are on these heavy charged particles and protons. Biological effects from GCR, they are not expected to cause acute effects. We call acute effects in-flight effects due to radiation, and we call stochastic effects long-term effects after the flight. However, they are the main risk driver for a trip to Mars because you can never get rid of them. You cannot really shield against them. They are very penetrating, high-energy particles. Some mitigation, shielding is not a way to mitigate this. A shorter flight to the Mars would be. Trapped particles. Van Allen belts on ISS, South Atlantic anomaly, it's usually trapped protons and electrons. Electrons we don't care that much about inside the vehicle because they will actually be stopped by the vehicle, so they will not reach the astronauts' bodies. Protons is what's important there, and if the mission planning trajectory causes you to avoid some of those passes, that's great. To spend less time in the Van Allen belts, that's also great. However, they are very localized and transient events. So the risk is somewhat secondary because it doesn't last long. Do not cause acute effects, however, contribute to the overall dose of the crew members. Passive shielding is effective, but passive shielding comes with lots of mass and work and money and cost. So we consider, due to the transient nature of this type of particles, that we don't really need it. We save that for solar particle events. And solar energetic particles are one of the risks that we need to consider, and those are also medium to high energy protons, and they are the main risk driver for short missions. And the way we mitigate this, at least during Artemis, is via the Orion shelter. This is a shelter that's built underneath the crew seats where they can get in case of a solar particle event. A small comparison between ground and space. On ground, you have time and distance and shielding. Stay away from the source. Don't spend too much time there, and use lots of lead to protect yourself from the source, as well as ALARA, as low as reasonably achievable. In space, that doesn't work that much. For example, the time spent, it literally depends on the design reference mission. You may have short missions, you may have very long missions, so you cannot really control that. The distance, same idea. The radiation is everywhere. It's not like you can impose a particular distance between you and the radiation source in space. And when it comes to shielding, lead doesn't work. Lead being a high-Z material, it will actually generate lots of secondary particles from the incident radiation, so it's not at all advisable to use lead for space radiation. Low-Z materials, plastic, water, it's what you need to have. ALARA is successfully implemented for space as well. Now, how do we move from red to green? The photos there is the Space Radiation Analysis Group folks from 1973. This group existed in the Gemini time. We provided support Gemini, Apollo, and throughout all until today. And we kind of were playing being cute and took a picture dressed up in black and white as well a few years ago. However, how do we move from red to green? We try to maintain the exposure of the astronauts below established limits. I know Lindsay mentioned some of those limits. They are covered in the NASA Standard 3001, and I'll show a few details on those. And we also have a probabilistic risk metric to monitor, report, and limit the cancer risk to astronauts, and that's done via the NASA cancer risk model. We develop and certify instrumentation to measure the crew dose. We perform vehicle design evaluations to optimize shielding and radiation protection, and the dedicated shelter recommendations for passes through the Van Allen belts and so forth. Provide real-time Houston mission control support to monitor space weather and the implications, and also provide support during solar particle events. Part of that is real-time recommendations to the flight team and the crew, go seek shelter, what activities can be impinged by the upcoming contingency event, and so forth. Some of the exposure limits, a few words about our exposure limits. So NASA has dedicated exposure limits, and when we develop those, we develop them per recommendations from external entities, and one of them is the National Council on Radiation Protection and Measurements. And there is a list of NCRP reports that are particularly of interest for astronaut exposure. And also we look at National Academies of Sciences recommendations for radiation protection in space. What comes out of it is a list of requirements that are implemented at the NASA level, the NASA agency level in the NASA Standard 3001, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And I have some examples here, and I wish I added the one on nuclear technologies that Lindsay mentioned. Is not here, but I can say just a few words about it. Pretty much what we have is a total carrier limit for 600 millisieverts. We also have a limit to short-term or career non-cancer effects, and also solar particle events. Complying with ALARA, it's one of them, and we have another one on nuclear technologies. The idea for the nuclear technologies, the way the limit looks today, is we are trying to ensure we don't get more than 10% above what's already experienced by the astronauts from the environmental radiation that they encounter. So don't increase it by more than 10% from just the nuclear technologies alone. And these are some of the examples, for example, for the career non-cancer effects. We look at lens, skin, blood-forming organs, circulatory system, and so on. And we have 30-day, 1 year, and career limits. And this is just an eye chart. I'm not going to go through it, but if you're ever interested to go read the NASA Standard 3001, which, by the way, it's available online, publicly available, you can just Google it and you find it, you'll notice that for radiation, we have different parameters that we look for and different units. Units in physics, as you all know, are very, very important, and they are not created equal. So if you have more questions about particular units, I can chat with you after. Moving on towards the Artemis I mission. Artemis I mission was one mission that we all waited for so long, and we were so happy when it happened. And it was a mission that had the most amazing suite of radiation payloads and science and operations as well. I don't think we ever had a mission with so many radiation detectors on it before. The mission duration was 25 days and 10 hours, 11 hours. And for this mission, the important piece of radiation is that the Orion vehicle was the first NASA spacecraft on which radiation protection was levied as a design driving requirement. All the other vehicles were not designed with radiation in mind. We implemented controls once they flew to protect the crew, but they were not particularly designed having this requirement. This is just a photo of the trajectory that was available everywhere online. We launched on November 16, came back on December 11. We had 2 Van Allen belt passes, inner belt crossing and outer belt crossing. They were quite short. We were hoping, this being not a crewed mission, we were hoping for longer ones, so we get better statistics and more data, but it so happened that they were quite short. And we had also 2 lunar approaches on November 22nd and December 5th. A little bit about one of our instruments that's going to fly for all Artemis flights as an operational instrument inside the Orion capsule. This is HERA, Hybrid Electronic Radiation Assessor. It flew on Artemis I as well. And it's an active radiation detector with full vehicle integration in terms of power and communication. It consists of 3 different units, and going for Artemis III, we are actually going to have 6. They are in strings. The HPUs and HSUs are in strings of 3. And it's based on silicon hybrid pixelated technology, TimePix. Fun fact, we did send a version of this instrument. It looks different, but the same technology, Timepics technology, on the Peregrine mission for the CLIPS mission, Astrobotic, that just took place. The hybrid pixel detector is 256 by 256 independent pixels, so that's how many measurement data points you get, and the sensor layer for the silicon is about 500 micrometers. So it has onboard analysis in terms of dose rate, linear energy transfer, mission dose, and right there you see a CAD model of the Orion vehicle and the locations of the sensors. But also it has the alarm capability. This is going to be the dedicated instrument to alarm in case of a solar particle event, based on a particular dose rate threshold that we are going to set. Some data, linear energy transfer spectra data from this instrument. The LET spectra GCR, you'll see how pretty much you look at linear energy transfer through a material, and you look at it, look at the flux versus the LET, and you see how it decreases for high particles, high energy particles. Right there, by the time you get to 100, 200, you're in the iron range. By the time you get to 1,000 on the x-axis, you're in the krypton range, to put in perspective the ions that make up the GCR. But what's cool about these pictures is the visual on the right. So Timepics technology allows for these visual frames in which you actually see the particles going through. And you'll be able to identify by just looking at it and doing some analysis what type of particles they are. So the big blob right there in the middle of the screen, that's how a heavy ion from a GCR looks like. So you see some of this, you know that that's a heavy ion response. And then you go to the next, and now you go through the inner belts where you have protons, and that's how proton signatures look like on the image right there. And moving on through the outer belts, which were primarily electrons, those dots are the electrons on the image. So it's nice because you can have particle recognition by image analysis as well. We also flew radiation detectors inside the pockets of the Commander Manikin Campos. I'm not sure how much you all kept track of Manikin Campos and the Mare Phantoms, but we had 3 passengers. They're called purposeful passengers. And we had 2 crew-active dosimeters. These are the personal dosimeters that we developed at Space Radiation Analysis Group at NASA Johnson Space Center, and they are currently flown on ISS for the crew members, and they will be the personal dosimeters dedicated for inside monitoring during the Artemis program as well. These are much simpler detectors compared to the Timepics technology. They are very small, 3 centimeters by 5 centimeters, something in that effect. They weigh only 35 grams since they have to be crew-worn. And we flew 2 of them for this particular project. This is how the information from these detectors look like. The top graph is the whole mission, and when the Van Allen belt pass is just one blip in this whole mission. It's shown for both of the detectors, and the bottom graphs show the cumulative dose. What CAD measures is the cumulative dose as it goes through the mission. You see the launch, you see the land, and what it accumulates in between. Now, if you try to magnify those graphs on the right, you look at the Van Allen belt passes, and you see the big peaks as we went through the only 30 minutes of exposure compared to the 25-day mission. Mare. Mare was a huge Artemis I science payload that involved an international collaboration with German Aerospace Center, Lockheed Martin, Israel Space Agency, and STEMRAD, which is an Israeli space corporation. And lots of partners from different countries in Europe and other continents, Japan and USA as well, that contributed from universities, from academia, that contributed with some of their detectors for this project. So Matryoshka AstroRad radiation experiment, what is it about? It consisted of 2 identical anthropomorphic phantom torsos, actually. They were called Helga and Zohar, and they were customized to accommodate a multitude of radiation detectors, both passive detectors and active. What we call an active detector, it's something that could, hypothetically speaking, give you information real time, meaning something operated by a battery or power of any type. Now, for Artemis I, we did not have data telemetry, so we did not get data real time. However, we retrieved that data after the fact. For Artemis II, all of these active instruments will have data telemetry associated with them. The phantoms were placed in seats 3 and 4 of the crew seats. And what we did to be able to incorporate the detectors inside the phantoms was actually slice the phantoms in 38 individual slices, and I think I have a picture on the next slide how those look like inside, and that will accommodate for a lot of small luminescence dosimeters. What's the purpose of this? The purpose of this was to develop a detailed body organ dose mapping. Radiation impacts different body organs at different levels. So how much radiation or how much damage would be done to the lungs versus the uterus versus the breast? To be able to measure the level of radiation at those, you have to have something that it inserts inside the body. And the phantom was built of materials that are similar to the densities of bone and the rest of the organs that are relevant. Now, fun fact, we had a similar project on ISS, and I have actually a slide on that to just show you later on. But on the ISS one, we had just one Matryoshka phantom that went in different modules, including outside of ISS for a year. That one was made with real human bones. So when we had this project, that was the attempt first to have human real bones. However, since no humans are identical, no bones are identical, and we wanted the phantoms to be really, really identical. Why? Because besides doing the dose mapping, we were looking to investigate a protective equipment, a vest, created by STEMRED, an Israel Space Agency, that could potentially be used in case of a solar particle event. You have a solar particle event, is it worth to just don this vest? Will it protect you compared to going to a shelter, for example? That was the idea, to investigate that. And of course, you can use all of this data to validate any tools, operational or design tools that we have. MARA was in the news. It was supported by NASA administrators, 2 or 3 of them. It took a long time to have the project because Artemis I kept slipping and slipping. However, we made it. And a picture of a slice you see there on your right at the top right, you see a picture of one of the slices. Those are the lungs, and the little holes inside, that's where you fit your dosimeters. Each one of those holes can hold up to 8. So if you do some math, we had about 1,400 measurement data points per phantom, and in those data points, in those locations, we had lots of dosimeters. So overall, we had about 10,000 in the body. It was a contribution from DLR and NASA. So NASA's contribution, it was 18 of our crew active dosimeters that were deployed above the phantom, underneath and above the vest as well, and also 3,000 of these small dosimeters that were placed as different organs inside the body. And this is a nice video created by the German Aerospace Center that shows the phantoms being built up in Cologne. All right, some pictures of us working at Kennedy Space Center. The DLR team traveled to KSC, and that's where we implemented and we placed in the small detectors. We placed them in Cologne. The active dosimeters that required the battery, since we wanted to save the battery, we did that just prior to flight, about 2 weeks prior to flight, and we did that at KSC. And that's the whole team working it with the phantoms assembled for flight and ready to go. Going to VAB and installing them in the vehicle, that was an exciting day. And this is what we hope to get out of it. We have submitted the first paper to Nature. The first paper doesn't have yet all the organ dose measurements. However, it has a summary of the active instrument measurements that we had for Orion. But what we have to get out of it is this type of dose mapping. And this is an example of what we did with the ISS Phantom many years ago. Red, it's bad here. Blue, it's good. You'll get inside the body, you'll get also some organ shielding from the body itself. So you'll get a little bit of protection from the body itself as well. And this is something that's not published yet, so please do not distribute. But this is an example of Artemis I data for the brain. So we have some brain slices, and here we looked at the average measured dose values compared to the calculations we made to estimate how much radiation will get to the brain. And the way you do that, you take the radiation, you need to have a good definition of your radiation environment, and the Disney document has some recommendations that are what you consider as your radiation environment, and you transport that through the vehicle and then through the person, and you do some effective dose calculations, and that's how we make up those. But as you can see, our models were quite good. 10.38 compared to 10.46, that's not a big deal, but overall we did notice that the model seems to be a little bit over-predicting, but just by less than 1%. Acknowledgements, you all know this cannot be done without a huge team of folks working this. I'm just their representative today. Space Radiation Analysis Group, we also acknowledged here our collaborators, international collaborators, payloads integration team from JC and KC, and moving towards Artemis II. With this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, thank you.
Thank you. That was very interesting. I'm interested in following on beyond the first few flights of Orion. Are you looking at putting similar instrumentation on Gateway?
Yes. So it has been already developed. It's called ARIS. And this instrument is also based on TimePix technology. So we have different versions of instruments based on TimePix technology that we try to make them suitable for different applications. So we'll have one on Gateway, we'll have one on HLS, and we plan to supply different versions to CLIPS missions as well. And so we have TimePix technology for all of those that are area monitoring, and the Crew-Active Dosimeter, which is a direct ion storage type of detector for personal dosimetry. And we are working also on some potential detectors to be used in the EVA suits.
Hi, it was a great presentation. A few years back, there was a study published in Lancet that looked at the population of Apollo astronauts who'd gone beyond the magnetosphere and had presumably been exposed to higher doses of especially galactic cosmic rays. They found that they had a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease, despite the fact that they were all excellent physical specimens going into Apollo. And they did some research that looked at taking animal models, rodents, I think, exposing them to high dose radiation in a particle accelerator, and finding damage to the coronary arteries that could be long-term causing inflammation and might make them more subject to heart disease. Is there anything like this being looked at in addition to the cancer risks from these radiations?
Yes, there is a list of, and I don't remember them all by heart, but it's even more than just the cardiovascular, but cardiovascular is for sure one of them. We have at Johnson Space Center something that's called Human System Risk Board, HSRB. In this board, we pretty much have a collection of risks and of identified risks that are pertinent to human health. And when it comes to radiation, carcinogenesis is one of them, but in addition to that, we have cardiovascular and CNS effects as well.
Again, another round of applause, please.